So, Elizabeth, what I did last night, I should have done probably days ago, but because I couldn't sleep and I really wanted to prep for this, I want to tee up the Jennifer conversation about what happened in the article that you wrote. Uh, it
We
is,
wrote.
I didn't write any of it. You are amazing, and you did that on your own, and it was great. Um, so we'll cut that part out. But in the article, you mentioned how you met the woman. If you kind of give the listeners and the viewers whatever kind of the background, maybe more than what's in the article
Yeah, just
Okay.
maybe
about.
maybe you just kick into, hey, I wrote an article about Jennifer. Then here's a
Well,
synopsis of her story.
I just said she wrote an article. It's a wonderful article. She wrote it. It's great. And go. Why don't you tell us about how you met her?
So I met Jennifer through my mom. My mom had gone to a Bible study she wasn't supposed to be at, just some things got canceled and she wound up being able to go. And Jennifer, at the end of this Bible study that she just happened to go to, she felt like some things had canceled that were supposed to be happening, and she felt like God was telling her, hey, because this person she follows said that there were a few extra seats, and she went. At the end of it, she wound up giving her testimony, and it really moved my mother. And my mother talked to her after, and it was about how she had gone through trial. It was a hung jury, just all the battles she was facing, not knowing how to move forward as a parent and what she was supposed to do, and battling the court system. And my mom was like, my daughter, I think you should talk to my daughter if you're willing. She's been through something similar, and maybe she could give you some pointers or just help you. And so my mom called me and asked me if I was willing to talk with her. And I told her absolutely, just because I remember what it was like for me and going through trial and how overwhelming it was, not knowing which direction to go and like what you're supposed to do next, what to expect, and just feeling alone. And I knew that if there was another mom going through it, she shouldn't have to go through it alone. And so that's how Jennifer and I met, actually.
So when we first talked about it, I haven't been through trauma uh, in that vein. I I guess in my world, I said, oh, I've been to court. I kind of understand this and understand that. But it wasn't until like I read the article and I then looked it up on YouTube, some of the things, the snippets that they had. And then it really kind of put your situation in a clearer light because, um, you can say, yeah, court, but when you're thinking about what the topic is, and that the folks that are not on camera, the family members that are sitting back there, it must have been kind of traumatizing for you as well to kind of revisit it and the frustrations that you had were put away. Maybe they came back to do their dirty work again. How did you fare going back into the courtroom?
Okay, so I'm not gonna lie, I actually struggled with it a little bit. I remember the first time that I went back to go to when the first original sentencing date was going to be before there was an issue and the judge had to go for a family emergency. And I was good when I went in. Like I felt the pressure, I felt the intensity really of it, and I felt myself shaking a little bit, and I was like, I'm good. I'm good. And I shut it off just like I did when I was going to court. And then when I left, like I was shaking, like I was cold, like, or
Yeah.
when I get super angry, I shake. I was shaking. And then I just started crying. And I didn't even know why at that moment that I was crying. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to go to the chiropractor. And on the way to the chiropractor, I knew at that moment, like all these things that I didn't deal with, all these things that I had just shut away, going through it, like just came flooding back to me. And I'm not going to lie, like I felt all of it. And it was a very huge realization for me that there's still stuff that I had to work through, and this is what I was supposed to be doing, because Jennifer, like, I wasn't just helping Jennifer and going through it. She really didn't know it at the time, but she was really helping me heal some things that
Mm,
I hadn't
right.
taken care
Right. So, just for as much as you'd like to share, I mean, I would assume that people haven't read the article yet, but this would be a good follow-up. Uh, so we're talking about a mother who has, discovered that I guess he's the stepfather, or
yes.
he's the stepfather,
Stepfather to
had
two of the
been,
victims, and a father to the other one.
okay. So, this dude who had, basically over a period of time, from the age of 9 to, I guess, the teens, 15 or so, was sexually assaulting his children. So there's more to it. We'll get into it. But uh, you have 4 children. I don't know how much you want to share with anybody, but you going through the same thing. I imagine that catharsis was also, the next day might have been hard. Was it only one day that you had to go to court? Was it multiple days, or is it
I wound up going to court twice. I actually have 6 children.
6? Oh,
I have
I'm the
the
one with 4. Right.
Yeah. We wound up going to court twice, in December and then again in January. And actually, the next day wasn't hard for me. Um, the next day, like, during that, and driving that day, and just having the silence in the truck, like, silence can speak volumes. And I knew what I was supposed to be doing. I always knew that after my kids' trial, like, I knew that something was going to come out of this, and I was called to do something with this. And if I can make a difference for one parent going through it, or a parent to help fight, get justice for their kids, because there isn't any justice in the system, like, then I knew that that's what I was going to do. And you just have that sense of peace going forward with it, knowing, like, this is my purpose. This is the beauty that comes from this.
Right. And so I want to get to, since we're talking about that, uh, the the trauma that this woman went through is that it took, I guess, 5 years or so for them to do anything about it, which is really tough when you're dealing with children who are unpacking their, the trauma that they're going through. And then to, go to trial, and this is all in the article, go to trial to have a hung jury, right? Which is basically the prosecution being weak. And I took some notes after watching some of that stuff. It was abhorrent, and I'll show a clip of it right here, I guess, as we cut away to it. But it was obvious that the prosecution, they put some weak attorney, maybe even a group of weak attorneys, because they failed at every turn. Like, from the simple things of reading a victim statement, or being prepared for the victim statement, of not objecting to some of the things that the court was saying out loud. As you have that right for a fair and impartial, judge. And it was clear that, and I'll get it into my notes. I got some specific questions about it, but it was clear that the judge had his belief about this sociopath. And that, truly, as you see the clip, this guy is, a quid pro quo stepdad, a sociopathic user of his surroundings. And it was clear to me that if they didn't have him on other crimes, there are other crimes out there that he did. And that it was, again, a fail, because just because you got people at work saying he's a great guy, well, how are you going to say he's a great guy when his kids are saying he's touching them sexually, right? Like, one thing doesn't equal the other. You say, oh, well, I'm here for him. Well, I wouldn't be here for him. And I think Ashton Kutcher was kind of called on the carpet for that too. It's like, this guy's been convicted of rape, and you're like sending a letter and saying, hey, leniency. Well, I think that you lose your camp when you rape kids. And Aspen, so you read the article, and I don't know if you did any of the homework there, but you coming from that survivor must have been infuriating for you as well. And having been in the court system probably even longer, right? How long was your case? How long did it take?
I think it took 2.5 years to get to
Mm,
trial, and then the trial was about a week long.
a week, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was literally like the worst week ever. It was so bad. It was just such a weird situation because the guy was an idiot, so he chose to represent himself because he basically didn't like the fact that all of his public defenders were telling him that there's no way that he's getting off because it wasn't just sexual assault, it was and attempted murder and kidnapping
Right.
and assault with a deadly weapon, all of this crazy torture stuff that he did to me. And so like any dude, like you're screwed. Sorry. Like there's only so much we can do
Right.
as your attorneys.
Right.
And he was like, okay, well, you're fired. And he went through like 8 public defenders that he was able to just
Mm,
fire and just get a new one and then push the trial back again. So here I was 18 years old, like trying to graduate high school, and I just want to get this thing over with and like continue on
mhm.
with my life. And they keep pushing it back. And like I just remember like I literally I had to be on so much medication at the time, and every single time that it would get pushed back, it was just like the biggest punch in the face. I literally would have like full blown like panic attacks on the floor, crying. Like, why does this keep happening to me? They talk about all the rights of, you have a right to a speedy trial, but that doesn't go for the victim. That only goes for the perpetrator. They have all the rights. The victim has no rights. We get no say in how anything goes. And that's not right at all. And there's so much, talk about prison reform and stuff like that to help the I understand that there's some people who were in there because they got falsely accused or whatever, but for the most part, the people who are in there because they did something awful. And why do they get the say and why do they get all of these rights and the victims just get literally nothing? They give me a squishy toy, they gave me a stress
Right.
ball. That was it. I didn't
Is
get
it?
a right to a speedy trial. I didn't get anything. I just had to wait it out and put my life on hold for 2.5 years, which is a long time, even longer when you're that young. As you get older,
Yeah.
time is,
Right.
less and less important. But when you're a teenager and you're trying to go off to college and, live your life and you can't leave your hometown because you have to wait for this freaking trial, like it
Yeah.
was just so bad. And I was like, it was this whole spiritual thing of like, why is this happening to me? And all of this stuff. And especially because I had already been abused as a child already. So it's like,
Yeah.
why is it so prevalent in the West? Like, why, you don't see that. I'm currently in Bali. Like, you don't see that over here because they actually
Mm,
punish crime. You don't see people get away with that. If you're caught with a tiny amount of drugs that are legal in the States, you get the death penalty. Like,
mhm.
and they're strict about it. And so that stuff doesn't fly
Well, I wanted
here. And I really feel like, America needs to take notes on that.
I wanted to talk about that. For both of you, really, what I know as a victim of, and I say victim, and to this day, I still am reluctant to call myself a victim, even though it is what it is. When you're 9 and 9 to 11 and things are happening sexually to you that you don't understand, uh that's victim. But you're it's hard to call yourself a victim in your own movie, in your own story. But what I realized when you were saying that is that when you're a kid, you pack everything up as nice and tight as you can because you have to, right? It isn't until later that people say, we need to unpack that, right? And I would say that, for some people, they're not, ever ready to unpack it. My mother, as much as it would bleed out in her drinking, the hurt and pain, having been raped by her father, you know, that's a tough one to unpack for sure. And when I look at that, I see kind of these three generations, you know, of folks, you know, you guys, where uh, you're at different stages of unpacking. My mother, who will never unpack what happened to her, and the way that she raised me had a lot to do with how, you know, effed up she was. And then I see myself in how I raised my kids, and, you know, getting better, but having so many problems with relationships. But when I was younger, that stuff was packed up nice and quiet. It was like this thing that lived in this closet, and it was fine to be there. You know, the less people that knew about it, the better. And that suited us. What I can't really appreciate is that you were a teenager having to unpack this for court, for this process, right? It isn't even for the justice. You knew that kind of immediately. You said something, okay, an arrest was made. Finally, 2 years later, you know, you're in court. Nothing is moving real fast. They're using kind of legal speak to, you know, they gave you a squishy ball, but the hard work, you know, for teenager, if I had to unpack what happened to me at that age, what a social death that would have felt like for me, you know?
Yeah,
And
it was a really dark place for sure.
no, well,
Hey,
talk like that. Yeah,
can I throw something in that was shared with me
sure.
about Aspen and her case? I wasn't there, but I was listening to Craig, you know, through a phone call as a support. Um, her attacker, representing himself, had the right to question her on the stand, and her mother. And I
Right.
think that's something that maybe I don't know if you feel like talking about that, Aspen, but I think that's something that the people need to hear about, because it's to me, it's very egregious.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be honest. I think in my case, that was the best option. I can understand that if I was like a little kid, how absolutely traumatizing that would be, and that should never be allowed
Yeah.
to happen. But for me, the guy was an absolute idiot, and he had like 7 brain cells. And that's being generous. And so for me, it was great because he was just telling on himself over and over and over again. And like he would say, "Oh, I didn't do it," and then he would be like, "Oh, well, yeah, but it was consensual." And he just like kept going back and forth. He
Hmm.
couldn't stick to a story, and like he would like I would get up there and they're like, "Okay, we'll go ahead and, you know, ask her the questions that you want to ask." And he was like, well, what color were the doors if this happened at this place? What color were the doors?" I'm like, "Bro, it was five, like, well, 2 years ago. Like, I don't remember. I was kind of
Hmm.
busy being raped to remember
Right.
what
I could
color
tell
the
you what the
doors
ceiling
were."
looked
Like,
like or something, you know, it's like,
yeah, it was ridiculous. I was like, "Really?" But the whole jury was just like, "This guy's a clown." And you could see
mm,
the bailiffs and in the courtroom just like laughing. Like he was just
hmm,
completely embarrassing himself and putting himself away, really. So,
hmm,
I mean, it worked out for me because I feel like I would have been irritated if I had another random man trying to say, "Oh, she's a liar." Like I would have like
hmm.
gotten pissed and probably
Right.
like started yelling. But I was like, yeah, I mean, obviously the guy who did this is going to try to defend himself. And so for me, it worked out. But I can understand if you're, you know, you're younger, there's no reason why a child should ever, first of all, ever have to like attend something like that.
Hmm.
I'm gonna be honest because I feel like it's important to talk about. I was very suicidal. I did not want to be around. I was like, it was just so bad. Imagine an entire week being locked away in a room with this person
Yeah.
who did horrible things to you. And I just like turned my brain off and I was like, I don't
Mm,
want to do this. So it's horrible and I literally would not wish it upon my worst enemy. And it should be better for victims because there's no reason why I should have, having already gone through that, feel like my week in court was literally more traumatizing than actually getting raped with a machete to my throat
hmm.
for 5 hours straight. and being told
So
my body was going to be dumped in the wash.
right. You said something about the sorry, I want to get back to, I wanted to tie it into the case that we were. So this dude, you were lucky because, well, he was an idiot. Whereas, it's still a narcissist, because I did an unpacking myself of this guy. All I had to do was sit and watch him as the victim statements were read, and I stopped in the middle of the victim statement. And Elizabeth, I want you to kind of check me on this, but I stopped to write this. Then I hit go, so I know I'm right, but but I stopped it, right when she was saying to call this guy a monster and yada yada. But the savviness of the guy, if he had been able to think right, you could have been in a very precarious. I mean, I can't. When I think about these children, the people that put in their victim impact statements, to have to see this guy, go from 14 counts, of child molestation, and what was the other count? Was it's child molestation and indecent exposure, down to the least that they can do. When I looked at the law, I was like, wait a second, because they're under a certain age, under 15, it's always assumed it's going to cause serious harm to a child. So take the sex part out of it. If you go and whip the shit out of a kid because you're a maniac, he would have gotten more time. He would have gotten time, probably, right? When I read that, I said, I don't understand, because he's admitting to this, which is a crime, and he's admitting to that to get them. Okay, so you got them down to these two because they didn't want to go back to court, which the listeners or the watchers of this, I'll show the affidavit, sorry, the plea agreement. When you unpack that, you're like, wow, I really feel like well, let me tell you, the result is that this guy got nothing but a stern warning from the judge. And when I say stern, I mean, hey, buddy, you better not do it again, or I'm going to see you again. It wasn't even a threat of jail. It was like, I'm going to remember this. That's what they said. Now, that to me is crazy, but it was obvious that those people had to deal with a guy, this CORNEJO, who was a savvy career criminal. He's a narcissist, sociopath, borderline personality disorder, not bipolar, as one might think, fixated on children as opportunities. So that's when you look at it, if they were to investigate this guy and he was in a position of law enforcement, and they find cops abusing their power all the time. He's abusing his power at home with children. What do you think he's doing with on the border with undocumented or migrants? Of course he's raping them, right? It's just a target of opportunity. And now, like I reminded Elizabeth, I'm writing this just from hearing this statement, because I know what that quid pro quo thing is, because that is what these bullies do. The way that she said, I wasn't able to do anything unless he was pleased. And he was only going to be pleased if he got what his ego needed, right? And that, when you think about what you guys have been through, that's what you take with you into the next relationship. It doesn't matter that that was rape. It doesn't matter that that they did wrong. You wonder, like Aspen, what you had said. It's like, why me? Why me? And even though you repacked it, I imagine, it comes out in the relationships. Have you seen that in your life? Elizabeth, have you seen, your anger burst out into new, fresh relationships? I'll start with Aspen because I know as a victim, you had to repack it a bit. So how has that
Yeah.
worked for you? Being that you're
Um,
single now, so right.
yeah, it's weird. It comes in cycles. You know, healing is not linear. It's weird. Sometimes I'm like, okay, well, whatever. Sometimes I have these phases where I just don't feel anything at all. For like months. I just like don't. I'm just stoic. I don't feel any emotions because I had to turn them off when this was happening to me. If I would cry, he would, threaten to kill me. So I couldn't cry. I had to just shut down. And that's tough to turn back on. So I go through phases where I just don't feel any emotions, or if I feel like all the emotions at once. So it's kind of like I describe it like a volcano, and that's not a healthy way to be. I'm working on it.
Mm-mm.
I'm still in therapy. I'm probably going to be in therapy for the rest of my life. But my anger problems are a lot better now than they were. But it's weird. Like it's just weird to feel like sometimes I feel fine, sometimes I feel like I'm really not fine at all. And just have these bursts of, yeah, I do have bursts of anger. I have bursts of depression. So it's hard, and it's literally it's a life sentence of trauma, and that's why it makes me so
Hmm.
mad that these predators don't get a life sentence, because how come it's fair that the victims have to get a life sentence of living with this,
Right.
and the perpetrators get to, the vast majority of the time in the United States, get a slap on the wrist and just continue their life as usual.
It's unfathomable to me. And when you think about what happened to you, and you got the court to agree with you, you got the court to be on your side. For those people, those other kids, the victims of this case in the Jennifer case, they didn't get the right outcome. They got told basically that they're liars, but they couldn't prove it. The way that the judge read this thing, and the way that I feel that what the state failed to do was easy for any layman. He's not admitting that he did these things. He is saying he isn't. And then to hear the judge kind of echo, you've done all these good things since this all started. We recognize your service and it's indicative of your service. And meanwhile, you have to know that the family and the victims are in the back. So what does that say to them? I mean, that says that you are a liar or you don't matter. So in your case, Aspen, you got them to say, we agree with you and he's a piece of crap, right? What happens to these kids? They were told, you know, deal with it, basically. Elizabeth, your thoughts on that?
So for me, and how I was looking at it was, and how I looked at it even just with my own children, it goes along with not necessarily saying they're a liar. It's, well, you can be a good human being in public, act like a great person, be this leader in your community, and you can get away with anything.
Yeah,
It
right,
really doesn't matter what you did, as long as you're contributing to society in other ways. We're gonna recognize that, and you're gonna get something off of it. And so these
right,
victims are left thinking, what's the point in telling? What's the point in doing anything? Because I'm gonna sit up here, I'm gonna get ripped apart, I'm gonna be pretty much like berated and called a liar without being told that I'm a liar. But I know that they went through the process of saying that they rehearsed this, that they made it up and went into cahoots and did it. And these were two girls that didn't even know each other, had never met each other, had never talked on the phone, didn't know about each other. The moms didn't know about each other. Like, you have two victims saying the same thing in different time periods. How is that not enough to bring this to the court system and convince a jury, hey, like, look, it's so easy to be in a position of power and use that for you, and to use it against others to essentially get away with exactly what he got away with. And he
right.
got
And
serious.
Pat,
Yeah, he got
well, no,
life.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, you're good. I mean, he got life probation. What are the
Well, that
victims?
means nothing. That life
Yeah,
probation, and then the way
means
that
nothing.
the judge said it. Let me just kind of the victim, when it comes to the victim statement, which everybody should hear, and I'll link to that. The victim basically, the most that they could ask, they're asking for the max, which was what the
Five,
most he was going to get was 5 years.
yeah.
That was max,
Yeah.
and a lifetime protective order. And that is a victim who is having to put their ask into this bowl that already exists. Well, because he pled to this, this is the max we can get, and that's what they asked for. And meanwhile, the defense goes on a rant. Well, his supporters speak of his character. How hard it was for him to take a plea bargain, right? They're speaking out of both sides of their mouth. In front of the victims, he says, taking the plea, but innocent, really. Then says, he's taking responsibility, that he was a low risk of offending again. How can you possibly say that, based upon this guy who is a sycophant when he needs to be? He is a narcissist. He is a chameleon, but his drug is the power. You can't challenge a person like that because he will get you. And that's what those kids knew. And that's what they're afraid of, because this guy, he will reoffend. He will. After, looking through this, and I dealt with some people that were in the state hospital for, crime, who were crazy. But it was obvious to me that, like, he plays a part to leverage his relationship to get something. So he can be Mr. Amazing at work, amazing in the community, and he'll be amazing as a probationary candidate. He's going to bend over backwards to be the martyr. It's like, hey, it really wasn't that, but I'm going to do my part to find the way he can manipulate the system. And it's obvious to children who recognize that more than the court did. And he's like, oh, so we're asking for this lifetime protective order. Great, fine. But you send him on his way after the judge. I get this. The plea should have been, I believe that the plea should have been vacated the minute that the judge recognized that he wasn't taking responsibility he wasn't admitting that he was guilty. Not in open court. He didn't do that, which was part of the plea agreement. So even in the agreement, they didn't do that. He kept on talking about it. And for the viewers, you really got to see this. He kept saying, hey, I don't see that you're taking responsibility for this. And if I hear that you're not taking responsibility for this, you're going to be back in front of me. Well, what does that say? Who cares? I'm going to come back, because he would go on and he said, well, it won't be good. If you tell your child, you do this again, it won't be good, you're going to have to deal with this again, right? There is no, if you do this, you lose your life. If you do this, you're not going to have a phone. You're not going to be able to see your friends. Very detailed. The court is supposed to be detailed. And this plea should have been vacated on that, because the plea demands it. And it showed that if he wasn't willing to admit that he had done it, that it was a coercion plea. Like, hey, you've got all these years that you're going to face. You better plea. And that's not legal, right? They avoid that. Of course, we all know that that's what's done. But he grants them lifetime protection. Big deal. And then he goes on to protect Cornejo. I don't know if you caught this, Elizabeth, but he had Cornejo's address redacted from the record so that people couldn't know where he lived. What? Which goes to the other point. He touches children, and you didn't make him assign him to the sex predator, website. Unbelievable. A failure to protect the masses. Let's see, what else he said. He minimizes his culpability in front of the court. He says he understands the victim, but really, in his statement, his filing thing, if you are guilty, really came down to it. Now, Aspen, you didn't get to see this probably. I don't know if you did or not, but there's one video on YouTube that I was able to find. I typed in his full name, bam, there are two videos. One that talks about the plea, and the other one is a court video of him sitting there listening to all this go on. You got to turn the volume up pretty good. But the judge himself is saying, I don't know what happened. Well, that's not your job to say you don't know what happened. What happened is what he's pleading to, right? That's the legal standard. So he's guilty. And yet he's like, I need to see what your character is going to be. So then he says, lifetime probation, but you got to earn your way off of probation. So that lifetime probation is only for the record so that they don't have to put a timeline. It just says lifetime probation. It doesn't mean that he's going to be on probation for his whole entire life. It just means that as long as the court deems that he is doing the right thing, inevitably he'll be back in court and he'll be off of probation. Because this kind of sociopath, not the one that you had to deal with, Aspen, this is a master manipulator. And his predation is on the weak. The kids were a target of opportunity for him because of his narcissism. Now, I was abused by a narcissist. The parents are away. It's I want something, and he took it. Now, it didn't happen again, right? But that's because I never put myself in that, situation again. That's just an opportunity for it. And this, this guy is going to present in a way that he did to his coworkers. But I believe that he will, if people are really paying attention, if you and Jennifer and those people are paying attention and they keep on pressing the court to look further into his thing, he'll violate his probation because he'll get comfortable, right? And he's going to think that he's got it. And if that's when he's going to get snagged. And what I do realize about people with this type of disorder is that when the domino drops and they've seen behind the curtain, they all drop. And now it's like, wow, and I tell this story because I used to think that there was depression, right? And people had it. It's like, oh, they're so sad. They're so sad. And then there's bipolar depression, right? That's a different thing. It looks the same, but the minute you tell the bipolar person that they can't do something, that sadness turns into rage, right? And that's you'll see with people like him, is that it'll just domino, and you're like, wow, how did we ever get fooled by him? But it's too late now. And I didn't mean to go on and on, but after, I've been up all night watching this and reading about it. And thank God, I did, because, one, I didn't sleep. I wasn't going to be able to sleep, but the anger kept me up and ready to go. Like when my alarm did go off and my eyes were open already, I was like, okay, it's time to get to work. And I'm really glad that despite, everything, that I did the homework. But to bring that back around, what Elizabeth, to the point of here's what they were given. How is Jennifer doing, and how are the victims doing?
I don't know about one of the victims. She chose to remain anonymous. Totally get it. But
right.
She's struggling. Jennifer is struggling. Her daughter is struggling. They're still having to deal with stuff with restitution that his attorneys are fighting back on, because she does have to do therapy. She does live in another state. She was a senior in high school when all this came out. So
right.
Trying to deal, like moving, having a baby, getting married and then having a baby, whatever. She is also struggling. Like, it's a process, and to know not only did the court system fail, but now they're still making me do more if I want to get anything or any justice out of it. If I want to get my therapy, and the days I've had to miss off of work, like paid for, she's having to literally jump through hoops. I can't go into too much detail about what they're asking for and stuff, but it's
Mm,
so far over what they need to be like, no, you did this, no, she's in therapy, and you pled guilty. Maybe you're not admitting guilt, but you pled guilty. No, you should just have to pay for these things. It shouldn't be a fight. That should already be
correct.
for victims.
Right.
So they're trying to work through it and, just get back to everyday life. But unfortunately, the situation is leaving them there with having to deal with some of these other things.
Sure. And, the cleaning up of that kind of detail is, again, for the victims. I, when you think about it, Aspen, the way that you being the person that I know you to be, um, you packed it up and you're strong, right? To your own peril. It's probably very difficult for you to trust and to see what love will look like unfettered, a full, open-hearted love. Because I recognize that my failing, unlike you, I was less empowered. I found myself weaker when I think about it, right? In my relationships, I to be abandoned because I realized that the reason why I was susceptible is because I was abandoned as a child. I was alone, and anything is better than being alone. So you become kind of this person who's needy. Whereas when I look at you, you're like, oh, I don't want, I don't, and that is a juxtaposition that I can't understand. But these kids, to be at the same age, I think that the court listens to crying children, young ones. But as we talked about with the sex trafficking thing, when these sex trafficked, abused people become adults, nobody wants to hear from them. They don't care, right? It holds no power over the court as mitigating circumstances for anything. And I think that you got lucky a bit. And to speak of that, was he ordered to pay any kind of restitution for you as well, or was he
Oh,
just a
get a
dummy?
load of this. Get a
Okay,
load
tell
of
me.
this. Um, yeah. And do you know what it was?
I don't know. Squishy?
$10 a month. I got a check for $10 every month. And my
Well,
mom just counted
that
it.
seems
She was like,
hurtful.
this is disrespectful. Like,
Correct.
just stop sending these checks. Like, this is
Right.
like
On
it's
principle.
pissing us off.
Right.
It was he was ordered to literally only pay whatever 2 cents an hour, whatever he was gonna be making in
Making
prison
in
for the rest
prison.
of his life,
Right.
making license plates or whatever the hell they do in there. And I'm like, yeah,
Right.
okay, well, like, I don't, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
really, $10 a month? Like,
And
I can buy myself some
in
Taco Bell, get free Taco Bell once a
right,
month.
but see, then you're linked to this person in a really in a unjust, unequal way. It's like this guy. His drug was a will to power over people. That's why he was in the job that he did. That's how he operated. If you called him out on anything, that disdain that he had for you would go to his grave. He was going to do anything he can to get, because he's just that guy. Your guy just seemed like, he's an idiot. And, in that regard, you're lucky and unlucky. But to have the court say, hey, we're going to remind you that you're the victim by sending you $10 so you can get Taco Bell is disgusting. Now, whereas I will say it in how many, what was the outcome as far as prison for this guy, for your view?
Yeah, well, considering he did have priors and he also was on probation. And I think that if I'm not mistaken, I think that there was also already an active warrant for his arrest for something else. And he had, it was like 5 or 6 counts of sexual assault, or seven, I can't remember. And then the other things, assault with a deadly
Mhm.
weapon, kidnapping. So he did get 65 years or something. So
Right.
that's, he was already in his 30s, so thank God for that. So he'll never get
Right.
out.
Right.
But yeah, I mean the guy when I was 6, he got like a year, and then they let him back out. But I didn't
Right.
know about that at the time because, my parents didn't think to tell me. They thought that I was just better off not knowing, but I was couldn't sleep at night because I was like afraid that he would like break in my house. He knew where I lived. And that's what he said he would
Yeah.
do if I told. So it's just like it's crazy to see the stark contrast between, having both of those situations. It's like, that if somebody is like this, that they're gonna reoffend. So why is it even a
Correct.
possibility for anything other than a life sentence? That's not okay.
Yeah. Right. And now, Elizabeth, when we think about that, what I can appreciate about this restitution thing, it's not a civil case. So unlike O.J. Simpson, who says, "Well, you ain't going to get your money," right? And they've not gotten a penny, which breaks your heart, right? Because what? How did that happen? But in this case, if he fails to do that, that will be breaking the conditions of his plea. And so that, the thing is, I hope to God that they put something on him that is hard to do, because he's not in prison making, 2 cents an hour, whatever he's going to do. But you know, I have no faith in this judge or that court. It is abhorrent to me that it went the way they did. And you're right, Aspen. The victims lose their voice when it goes to court because, as far as the court's concerned, everything's on the paper. You show up, you say the thing, you're a talking monkey to them, at that point. And you better say the thing that you said, right? There's no room for wiggle, and they look at you like, if you did change your story, if some new thing came to light, you're really not a friend to the court at all, you know. And that is just sickening because why are we here, right? And when you realize that this guy had done these things, and everybody, you got to read this thing. The initial 14 counts, it may seem repetitive, but they are, uniquely uh, true. And that if you had to plead to two, and you say plea, which I'm saying you're guilty, they say you plea bargain, right? Well, you did. But I think that gives them a way of saying, I had to take the plea, right? I had to take the plea, which is no friend to the victims at all. So, as we wrap this up, I want to give you guys a last word, even you, Forrest, up there, because you've been so
Well,
kind.
there's a couple of things that I want to point out in this system that we have. It's evolved to the point because so many people, I mean, the common joke is, hey, you were too stupid to get out of jury duty. Okay.
Here
We
we
should
are.
start teaching our kids when they're young, it is a privilege to go to jury duty. And the reason it's not just to serve, it's to inspect the system. I'm sure that many of the jurors that walked out of there, many of the people in the court were angry with what took place, what they witnessed. But we teach people to try to get out of jury duty. And what's interesting to me is that we are so enamored with trauma that happens in society, but yet this is, to me, is the best. If you want to see real trauma, if you want to be it's like when you drive by a car wreck, everybody slows down to see it. This is real life provides you with what you need to see and what you can do to try to fix things. Okay. That's what really upsets me is everybody tries to get out of jury duty. And then when they become in that situation that Aspen and Elizabeth and Jennifer were in, and it sucks. Well, yeah, it sucks because we've
Right.
allowed it to, because we're lazy and stupid.
Right.
You know, and I'm not pulling any punches on that. The fact
Well,
that the
it makes
judge
me,
can do what he does, you know, why did judges get away with what they get away with? You know,
well,
what's the instrument
mostly
to
because
resolve those issues?
the instrument is supposed to be the defense attorneys, the prosecution attorneys, and the judge. Those three things are supposed to make this thing go off. When the defendants, or sorry, the prosecution, the state, doesn't uh, put in objections for the record, there's nothing to go back to and say, hey, you need to look at this. This was unfair. You have to have something on the record. And you can't from the gallery say, I object. It has to be from them. They lost their voice. They lost the case. I would say that, going back to my case, I lost my case when I brought it up to my parents. I was an adult in the Navy. They looked like they stroked out, like, or glitched on a Zoom call.
Mm-hmm.
I'm waiting for their face to move. Didn't. They just come back into the conversation and moved on. And honestly, that's the norm. Because if the first judge you have to tell your cases to a parent, and if the parent doesn't believe you or doesn't care or doesn't want to hear about it, or hey, and that's the norm. Millions of kids are being touched inappropriately by people they know. And they're telling people about it, or their behavior changes. Or, Elizabeth, we talked about this. If you're not paying attention, you're not paying attention. That is an abuse. Because your kids will blame you for pretty much anything anytime anyway. The fact is that when things happen and you don't recognize the change in temperature in the room, you failed as a parent, in my opinion.
Yes
So I
and
want to give you the last word on it.
yes and no. There
Wait,
are
yeah.
plenty of times in life that as a parent, like you're trying to pay attention, you're trying to be on top of it, and you're just gonna miss it. Like in my case, like I did have my sixth kid and life was hectic and crazy. I mean, he was in the NICU for 4.5 months, and just in general, like life with six kids is crazy and hectic. And the signs at my home, um, when we were talking to the psychologist and talking to their counselors, they were like things like not wanting to get out of bed in the morning. And I thought, okay, maybe
Mhm.
now because it's a third kid in school, it's just harder for all of them to get motivated because they're distracted
Right.
by each other. It was being edgier, like arguing with each other more. It was having a few accidents at school. My kindergartner was having accidents at school. Those were the signs. How do you not
Right.
know that that's not something in regular life going on? Because I am on
I
top
hear
of it.
you.
Obviously, I'm
Yeah.
not 100% all the time, but like I really try to be. But when you have a child that tells you something, there are so many parents that choose to will take care of it. Will just make sure that they're not
Mhm.
around it. They never address it. They never get counseling. They don't want to talk about it again. And they just remove that person from the life. Well, how do you know that that person is not going to go touch somebody else? Because they're going to,
Sure.
if they were willing to with
Right.
your child, and you chose to do nothing.
Right.
Nothing.
Right. Right.
And that's why it was so important for me in our case when they were like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? I was like, we're going to call the police. Like
Right.
this isn't an option. And there was this huge issue of, well, his life is going to be over and blah blah. What about my kids' lives? Like like Aspen said, will struggle with this for the rest of their life. I know I didn't deal with mine as a child. I tried to tell my parents once, but I didn't say enough for them to really know. And then I had to
Mhm.
deal with that. And in my
Right.
relationship, I can directly see so many things now that I've had to deal with my own trauma so that I could help my kids, where it directly affected my marriage and things that I know, like I can look back now and be like that was on me. Like I thought that was him, but that part was on me. And
Mhm.
so what do you get out of that when a parent doesn't choose to call and do something about it, or be in your child's phone, see if they're talking to anybody else, or if something's happened, even if they're not willing to talk to you, like invade their privacy because they have none, because
Mhm.
you could catch these things.
Well, I want to let me amend what I meant, because knowing your story, I meant obviously not to say that you knowing your
No,
story. I'm saying that when things are happening and because you got there, right? You eventually got to a place where you're like, something is wrong, right? Because it takes data, right? And again, we talked about at the start of this that children are great at packing things up, right? They pack it up, and that's my wife's outside and they're like lingerie, letting ducks out. I'm sorry, but it's like, okay, love my life, I suppose. Uh, but the what I mean is that you inevitably got to a place where you were faced with a truth, a situation, and you had no option. It's like if somebody in my line of work, in my once line of work, if somebody said, I want to kill myself, I didn't get to say, well, maybe you shouldn't. And, go home and think about it, right? Now, of course, as a professional, you typically have to determine, do they have a plan? Do they have the opportunity, right? There's a lot of people that say, I want to kill myself. It was like, you walked 5 miles here. You didn't jump out in front of a car. I mean, it seems to me like you had opportunity, right? You had the means to do it. So it's a little different there. But in this case, when a child comes up, and I'm like, millions have done that and said, I don't like being home with them, or I just don't, mommy, or whatever. When the truth arrives and you don't do anything, that's the fail. That's what I mean, is that it's not that you could possibly know, especially when you're dealing with parents, because you can't win in this situation when it's a parent. You can't win for the child. You can't get it back. You can't restore their faith in what should be an axiom, something so self-evident that you don't even need to speak of it. And yet, there's where the first wrinkle happens, is that loss of trust. And then it happens again and again, because Aspen, for us, for all of us here, we had a sign on us that was seen by predators. They could see it and they manipulated it. Even your idiot guy and all of his whatever, he was able to hear a frequency and be able to tune in on it, because he would have had to get you to where you were gettable. And that's where they went. And that's where they get us. And what if it's a parent? That's all the time. And then you tell your kids, the parent, the abusive piece of shit parent, is in complete control of that child forever now. My mother, for all the wrongs that she did, I understand why. I understand. She never touched me. Oh, sorry. She whipped the shit out of me. She was an abuser, right? But I understand her, right? And I can understand how she feels to this day, looking back at those young years, knowing that the person who's supposed to love you and protect you did the absolute opposite of that and ruined you for everybody else, because that's what it did. And so when I was growing up going, well, my grandfather never did anything wrong to me, I don't feel that way now. I was like, bro, you're the author and creator of the pain I suffered and the weaknesses that I have. It's the sins of the father, right? And I think that, that's kind of a good place to end. Aspen, I don't know if I gave you an opportunity to wrap yours up, but please do, because I know it's late there for you.
Yeah, I just think, as a whole, wrapping everything up, I think that the the punishment should match the crime, and I'm not sure why it doesn't. If the victim gets a lifetime sentence of trauma, the perpetrator should get a lifetime sentence of prison. or the death
Right.
penalty. I really don't understand in my mind why in the world there is anything else other than those two options. I think it's completely unacceptable. And I think that we as a society need to make the court system and the world a safer place for victims. I think victims need more rights in the legal system, and that the predators need less say and shouldn't be allowed to run a circus in the courtroom and just leave the victims to deal with things on their own and never get justice, and then for the perpetrator to go out and just continue harming people with no consequences. We need to step up. We need to read every single person on our ballots and start voting these judges out. Research the judges in your county and see what crimes they're soft on and what crimes they're hard on, and see exactly who it is on your ballot so you can vote these judges that are soft on child predators out, because we have the power to do that. Most people overlook that part.
Right.
So please, if you want to help, that's a big thing that you can do to, let your friends know if you hear about a case where a judge lets a predator off like this one, and just spread the word and, vote these people out.
Well, I tell you, that's for the viewers out there. We want to know what you guys think of everything that we said, good and bad. A lot of things were brought up, and I would say that, for the majority, most people could probably get behind what we're saying. But if, you got to understand that, we have our slant on things. We want to hear from you guys as well. So please, take a look at this case. The perpetrator's name, I don't have his address because they took it off the record, but Efren L. For Lopez Cornejo. And this was a case in Arizona. Do the homework, because he does represent a pathology, a person, right? He's a persona that's out there. And I imagine that for anybody that's listening to this, I imagine more than half of you might know a person just like this. So please share in the comments, and we appreciate your time, and we'll get you next time. I thank you guys for your time, and I hope that we can get more articles out there. And I'd say press this guy. Let's invite him to fail his probation as much as we can.
Well, I want to point one other thing out, that because he's Border Patrol, and so he,
Not anymore.
Oh, he's not.
He was
No.
arrested at work and resigned.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
All right.
you don't get to keep your job. Thank God.
Okay.
But, yeah.
All right. Good to know.
Yeah. So you don't have to be worried, but you do have to worry about him, snagging some other job, some other place. And, this type of person, they are always that way. So, be on the lookout. Anyway, guys, God bless. Take care. Aspen, stay safe. You get rid of those lizards. I'll cover that in the comments, I suppose. But I appreciate you guys. Thanks.
All righty.